What's up guys, welcome to Daily Dose of Reddit. This is your host, Zach, and today's subreddit is r/StoriesAboutKevin. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode. This story's called Kevin, the Mature Age Student. Back in 2011, I was in my first semester of a master's degree in creative writing. As well as all the units related to my major, there were several core units that everyone in all the different creative arts majors had to do. These units were ostensibly about teaching us how to build sustainable careers in creative fields, but in reality tended to be pretentious wanks loaded with annoying group assignments. One particular unit was probably the biggest waste of time and money in my otherwise excellent degree, and I continually wish I could have just done another creative writing elective in its place, but that's a rant for another time. The major assignment was worth at least 60 or 70% of the grade if I remember correctly. It was a big group assignment. Our groups were chosen completely at random, and in the third week or so of the semester, I first met up with the rest of my group. One girl seemed perfectly nice and competent. I was rather wary about another one. Her English was very poor, and she seemed confused about the unit and her actual major. And the third was a mature age student who is the Kevin of the story. Now, when we first all met each other, I actually thought Kevin seemed like the ideal group member. He was in his late 30s or so, was from the United Arab Emirates, but spoke near fluent English with one of those cultured British-esque accents, and generally gave off the vibe of the stereotypical super serious mature age student. Wore a business suit to university, referred to fellow students as his colleagues, was always totally engaged in class, very passionate about his studies, and the like. I was actually slightly intimidated by him, in the sense that I thought, damn, I've really got to step up my game around this guy, no slacking off. Unfortunately, I soon discovered that Kevin was not only a narcissistic moron, but may or may not have been totally insane. So on to the actual assignment. Basically, this unit was called 2020 Vision, anticipating the creative future, or something equally pretentious, and I think was supposed to be all about how we'd adapt to changes in our chosen fields and ensure our work was still relevant and that we were being gainfully employed. However, how that worked in practice is that each week we'd have a lecture about Greek philosophy or Buddhist teachings, or indigenous Australian beliefs, or some motivational speaker or life coach, snake oil salesman would come in as a guest speaker, and we were expected to relate that to our own career ambitions. Once, I missed a lecture and asked what happened in it, and another student explained that they mostly just watched YouTube videos about a guy that would hang himself from hooks in his skin. The big group assignment involved us making some sort of artwork or creative project inspired by one of the subjects we received lectures on, and writing up a big research assignment that argued the rationale behind it. We ended up going with Buddhism, mainly because the two other group members were Buddhist, and while Kevin was a Muslim, he considered himself very knowledgeable on Buddhism, and they thought that would make the assignment easier. I wasn't too fussed either way, agnostic Australian here, and went along with it. The two girls were both doing visual arts majors and spoke English as a second language, so they volunteered to do the practical portion of the assessment, actually making the product, while me and Kevin would handle the written part. Kevin was majoring in corporate writing and had apparently been employed in that field in the past. "Writing is what I do," he explained. "I am very good at writing." During the next few weeks, I began to notice that Kevin was, well, a little eccentric to say the least. Group meetings would take forever as he'd go off on bizarre tangents and ramble about nothing for ages. He was obsessed with getting a 7, the highest mark possible at my university, and would always shoot down ideas that wouldn't get us a 7, or suggest some random thing and say, "We definitely get a 7 if we do that." That was partly why he argued for us choosing Buddhism as our topic, as he was convinced that, with two Buddhists in the group, we'd be assured a 7. Once, we were talking about an assignment in a different unit we were both doing. It was an academic report on an entrepreneur in the creative arts, and I was still undecided on who to do mine on. His suggestion, "You should write it about J.K. Rowling. You'll definitely get a 7 if you do it on J.K. Rowling." We had to submit the practical part first and do a presentation on it, and then the written part would be due a couple of weeks later. So once we worked out what the creative product would be, some bizarre water fountain Zen garden thing based on the Buddhist Eightfold Path, The two girls got to work, while me and Kevin began our early research and working out who would write which part of the report. And I'll say this, the non-Kevin members of the group did a great job, including the one I'd originally had serious reservations about. She was clearly insecure about her poor English, and to compensate, worked her ass off and totally pulled her weight. There was a pointed lesson there for me about my own prejudices. Me and Kevin divided our workload. If I recall, he did the background stuff about Buddhist ideas and the Eightfold Path, while I wrote the part about how it related to the actual product. And while our occasional meetings brought up some red flags, so far I figured it might have just been cultural differences. Or that maybe he was a bit of an idiot savant when it came to writing research assignments. He would boast about the 7s he received in other units, including on assignments I personally found a challenge. And I tend to be the naive sort who actually believes things people tell me. Still, he managed to find unique ways to screw up, such as when he agreed to get some sand at the last minute for the Zen garden. We all met up about an hour or two before we were meant to present the damn thing, asked where the sand was, and he says, "Oh yeah, I didn't get it." Another group member had to rush off and take a bus to a nearby park to get some. Finally, it was a few weeks before the written portion was due, and me and Kevin emailed each other our drafts for the other to review. We had a meeting scheduled a few days later where we'd trade notes and work out how we'd combine our sections into a coherent whole. And it was when I read his draft that I learned just how good of a writer he was. Despite having almost completed a master's degree in corporate writing, Kevin had apparently never learned about paragraphs. The 3,000-plus word document was a single block of text, which frequently read like the ramblings of a madman. Most of it was just streams of consciousness going off on long tangents that were only barely related to the topic at hand. While he spoke near fluent English, he clearly didn't write in fluent English, and the whole thing was a mess of basic grammar and syntax errors. And he disliked commas and periods almost as much as he disliked paragraphs. He repeated himself endlessly and pointlessly. For example, every time he mentioned the Eightfold Path, he'd then describe every step of the Eightfold Path in excruciating detail. Occasionally, it would drift into all caps and back again, as if he'd accidentally pressed the caps lock key and then turned it off again. What he wrote was well over the word limit for both his and my own sections combined, but maybe a third, if that, was actually relevant to the topic. Finally, he did not include a single reference or in-text citation. I took the time to write up a very detailed and constructive critique of his work, sugarcoating my thoughts as much as possible, and met up with him a few days later to discuss our sections. After giving him my critique again, trying to be as nice about it as possible, I asked him his thoughts on mine. "Oh, I never actually read it." "Well, I think that you should probably just handle that part of it." At that point, I realized that would probably be less work for me, and agreed. I asked him to just insert the citations into his section at the appropriate points and include a reference list and email it back to me, and left the meeting with fantasies of murdering this man swirling through my head. It soon became obvious that he did not understand how in-text citations or proper reference lists worked, as he emailed me the exact same document with a list of several books, just the titles and author, none of the other required info at the bottom. So I went through it, inserted a big red bolded insert citation here at every point that needed an in-text citation, and linked him to the university guidelines on references and citations. He soon sent me back a surly email explaining he'd done all the work I wanted him to do, and I looked at the document to see that he had instead just inserted some sentences and paragraphs at random points with citations after them, while not changing anything else. These new bits had no relation whatsoever with the surrounding sentences. I gave up expecting anything whatsoever from him, and instead decided it would be easier to just throw out much of what he'd written, salvage the few bits that had some worth, and write the rest of his section myself. As I got to work revising, I emailed the group with subsequent drafts to see if they had any thoughts. As I was removing a lot of Kevin's work, I felt I should at least keep him in the loop and give him a chance to object. Plus, I also wanted an email record in case I needed to prove just how the workload had ended up being distributed. He never had anything to say about my changes, and I'm almost certain he never read a single word of them. Which isn't to say he was silent. Oh, how I wish he was. No, instead, he inundated me with bizarre text messages about how much he hoped we'd get a 7 and various random thoughts he had about things I should add to the report. Once he texted me while I was at work asking me to respond to his email. I told him I was at work and that I would check it when I got home in a few hours and could get on the computer. 10 minutes later, he texted, "Have you read my email yet?" I explained yet again that I was at work and wouldn't be able to get onto my computer for several hours. Half an hour later, "Please reply to my email." I can't even remember what the email was, but I do remember it definitely wasn't anything that required an urgent reply or that could have just been texted to me. Finally, after a couple of weeks of busting my arse on this goddamn report, it was almost time to submit. Along with the report, we each had to write a short essay where we basically explained what we contributed to the assignment. This was what our lecturers would use to weight our individual grades. I was the one who would be submitting the combined document. I believe Kevin actually did offer to do this, but by that point, I wouldn't have trusted him to wipe his own arse without causing several deaths. And so everyone had to email their individual essays to me. Needless to say, I was very cautious to see what Kevin wrote. His essay was absolute madness. He did not even mention the assignment. As far as I could understand that rambling, barely coherent mess, he was describing a hypothetical situation where he got sent to prison and how he'd use the Buddhist Eightfold Path to cope with the situation. Instead of doing what I should have done and submitting it as is, I instead felt bad for the idiots and emailed him back, saying something like, "Hey, so the purpose of that essay is to actually explain your contributions to the assignment and your thought process and learning experiences as you worked on it." 10 minutes later, I received the following email. Paraphrased heavily, this was 8 years ago. "Okay, I did the changes you wanted me to do, but I'm very busy right now, don't make me change it again." Attached was a new essay. It was still pretty crap, but at least relevant to the topic at hand. I should point out that my grade would not have been affected in the slightest by his essay. They only influenced our individual grades, not the group grade. I was just trying to be nice. My housemate, who had been receiving regular updates on this lunatic, begged me to accidentally submit his original essay instead of the revised version, but my conscience got the better of me. To this day, he still hasn't forgiven me for taking pity on Kevin. We got our grades back some weeks later, and I received a 6, which I was very happy with. I ran into Kevin once or twice around campus later on. He was, of course, rather miffed that he didn't get a 7, and informed me that he was preparing to start a PhD. He's probably a tenured professor by now. Ah, I see. I've seen this kind of thing before. He just needs a simple respec, okay? He put too many points in charisma, but not enough in intelligence, okay? Yeah, it's simple. It's a simple fix. This story's called Kevin, the Anti-Semitic Teenage Meteorologist. I'm a 16-year-old high school junior telling this tale to you. Amazingly, I am 3 years Kevin's junior, but nonetheless, I tell you this bizarre tale, feeling as if I were his teacher or father. The place: a university summer academic program about weather. Everyone stays for a week in a university dorm and goes to classes about weather for a few hours and talks about climate change. It's essentially a convention and is very enjoyable for those of us who are passionate about climate science. Kevin was quite passionate, but was he talented? Oh hell no! What happened? On the evening everyone arrived at the university dorm where we would stay, Kevin showed up 2 hours late. The next morning, everyone was supposed to get up, eat breakfast, and walk to the classroom across the street. Kevin doesn't get up until 5 minutes to class, and we end up 30 minutes late because the teacher had to break in the door and drag him out of the shower. Kevin constantly asked ridiculous questions to guests. We had a few well-known storm chasers show up as guests and talk about how tornadoes work and stuff like that. Kevin asked one scientist from India if he could make him some curry. Kevin was in a program for high schoolers, but he was 19. He asked if he could teach the next year. He yelled at other students and asked the only girl in the class If a lesbian and a gay man have sex, is it still gay? Someone was bullying another student, so Kevin called the bully a gay bundle of sticks burned for fuel or whatever. Kevin pretended to be a bullfighter and slammed another student to the ground on pavement after sneaking up on him from behind, nearly killing him, all during the walk back to the dorm after school. During the evening activities the university had scheduled for students, we went to a bowling alley. Kevin repeatedly threw bowling balls while the machine was taking in the pins, destroying the entire lane. He also went sliding down the slippery lane for fun. A state senator, yes, a literal elected official, visited us to talk about climate change. This was a huge honor for him to come to our program. He even brought a Tesla Roadster to show us. The state senator makes a joke relevant to climate change. Kevin says, "While we're telling joke, here's a good one. My friends call me the perfect Jew because I can find money anywhere." Kevin finds out a kid is from a certain city and disparages his hometown as Meth City. There is one 76-year-old teacher teaching together with two students, college freshman and high school senior. They make Kevin eat lunch with the teachers because he can't be trusted. He proceeds to tell everybody he's a teacher. What does that sound like to you guys? Child neglect? Well, what's going on with this kid? He obviously has some deep desire for attention, because that's sad and ridiculous if it was because of a neglectful set of parents. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode.